Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
All right, guys, welcome back. Oh, and I am joined by one of my favorite shows here, guys. If you have been a part of this show with Miss Liz Winet, who is joined with me. Liz, so nice to see you.
Same here. Same here. Yes, literally.
Liz, I love this series that you put together, and the name of the series, it's the importance. It's the returning to normalcy post mitigation.
Yeah.
Can you give the audience who hasn't heard before the significance of that title, and then give us maybe a little synopsis of what happened up until now?
Yes.
Excuse me.
It's literally returning to normal post-COVID mitigation. This is part 6. The humanity suffered a lot during this over year, almost going on 2 years. The mitigation itself is what caused the pain and suffering. Illness, viruses don't shut down economies worldwide. Viruses don't tell people to stay in their house worldwide. The mitigation did. And so why did I say returning to normalcy? I reported an important statistic, which is depression in the United States amongst adults went from 8.5% pre-mitigation to 32.8%.
32.
Yeah, and you have to understand, it's more. 32.8 is people who have sought help, and therefore the diagnosis is on file. We all know that people depressed and anxious, it takes them a while to seek help, and many never do. So that's the tip of the iceberg, where over 1/3 of the United States adults reported suffering from depression. Depression is a specific diagnosis that goes along with psychologically. Hopelessness leads to depression. Anxiety is nervous about something, it's anticipating. Depression is hopelessness, it's exhaustion. It sucks out your energy and your creativity. So that is a really sobering diagnosis. Post-mitigation. Now, I went into what we talked about. I went through, what does the depression mean? What are things people can do to lift themselves up? And I always speak body, mind, and spirit, because the human being is body, mind, and spirit. And what the mitigation did, I said returning to normal. What the mitigation did was impose inhumane treatment of human beings. That is the best way to say it. And people always say post-COVID, like the virus caused it. And no, it did not. The mitigation caused it. And the mitigation has never happened. We've never told the world to do this. And I want
we broke up.
This is a worldwide phenomenon, a United States of America. This is worldwide.
How come Mark Twain knew about it?
Mark Twain. Okay, Mark Twain I introduced because returning to normal. Mark Twain said, "It is easier to fool a person than it is to get a person to admit they were fooled."
So
and I quoted that because people are stuck now for many reasons. And some simply believe this was necessary, and then they did it. And then people around there are getting very hurt. There were early reports from ER docs out of California that spousal abuse, child abuse was through the roof. People were getting drug problems, alcohol problems, very, very bad for a society and very bad for your immune system. Fear, nervousness slows down your immune response. That's why cancers go up when stress is high.
Okay.
Cancer goes up because your immune system isn't working properly, and your immune system kills cancer cells all the time.
Mind, body, spirit.
Yes. Mind, body, spirit. So people are afraid at times to admit their ego prevents them from admitting I was fooled.
Yeah.
So it's easier to suffer than it is to admit you were fooled. And why did my next series, my third class was on logical fallacies.
I love this one. This was a good one.
And what I'm explaining, and I just scratched the surface because there's many logical fallacies, but what is a logical fallacy? It is a innate ability of the human being to make a big mistake in logic. A logic and that innate ability is subconscious. It's what your subconscious likes to do. See, the subconscious likes to avoid pain, it seeks pleasure, and it always takes the most efficient route. So if you could fool a person into this is logical, logic is efficient, you will embrace it. And an example of logical fallacy, which you hear people talk about, it's the straw man concept. And that's when, if you and I are talking about something, and then I all of a sudden introduce a concept which sounds related, but it really isn't. Now, all of a sudden, you and I are only talking about that concept, like surviving COVID.
Right.
Okay. The logical fallacy that was imposed there was, if you care about humanity, then you will lock yourself up. You won't visit people. You will allow your beloved older relatives.
You let them die by themselves.
Yes. Yes, which is inhumane.
It's cruel.
And logically, we would have understood that, but how are we fooled? To save their life. And that is a logic, right? We naturally, as human beings, want to preserve our own life and the lives of our loved one. So the logical fallacy was, oh, you will do it to save their life, but they're not connected.
Not at all.
Never connected. As a matter of fact, spiritually, resiliency requires a person has the freedom to cope with stress, whatever works for them best uniquely. And resiliency, I'll go into more detail at an upcoming class where we're doing under this series. But we have shut down resiliency. And if you remember, and I'm going to do this on my next podcast, but there was a study done early on that said, wait a minute, something's going wrong here. People aren't recuperating and bouncing back like expected when there's a major crisis and trauma. And they were trying to explain it. And I'm telling you, the reason we couldn't bounce back is we had our hands tied. We couldn't do the things we normally do as human beings. What do? We go to church. We go to our support group. We could definitely visit our loved ones, for heaven's sake.
Family. We're not supposed to be alone.
And that's right. You're not supposed to be alone. Mitigation was completely inhumane. Yeah. Now, what did we do at the beginning? We did 2 weeks to slow the spread. Now, that made more sense because here's what happened. We had a new virus, potentially deadly. We didn't know. And so, we shut down borders temporarily because we didn't want to let anything more in, and we had to take inventory. But what happened? It all went wild. Institutions started instituting the lockdown. States instituted the lockdown, but all states didn't do it the same way. And some states did significantly better health-wise, not to mention financially. Well, let's just talk health here. And it was the people who did not lock up to the degree wanted.
Weren't you telling us that there was medicine and ways to combat this that we didn't even use, that had worked in the past?
Yes. They weren't allowed to use freely. Then I told you there was a she gets called in when there are health crises worldwide. She goes to Africa. She goes to all different countries and uses what the people have locally to combat the disease that's going on. Right. And she was called into New York early on, and I don't have her name. I can find out her name, but she was out of Michigan. And she said, wait a minute, I don't want to, this is, COVID thing is new. We haven't really studied it. I don't know what to recommend. And they said to her, exactly, nothing much is known. Isn't that what you do for a living when you go to another country? And she said, I'm in. And what she did is she used early on hydrochloroquine, ivermectin. That's what she used. Yeah. And people got better. And people who got the disease didn't get as sick. See, we knew early on.
Your people did awesome with the D and the C.
That's right.
Your people went through this very well.
We knew so much early on. We knew that people lower on vitamin D were on higher risk, so D is very important for immune response. We knew that low zinc and C also had a correlation. I found out serendipitously, I run a weight loss clinic. And when fat burns quickly, which my patients are in ketosis, it burns to the tune of about 3 pounds a week. When fat burns quickly, all the toxins your body puts in your fat gets back into your blood. And some of those are heavy metals. And so what I knew early on is alpha lipoic acid hooks into heavy metals and eliminates it from your body. What is the natural source of alpha lipoic acid? It is
Leafy greens.
green vegetables. Oh, you are so paying attention here.
I love your show. I'm telling you.
Yeah. So my patients were on alpha lipoic acid, a higher dose than usual because it was to detoxify.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you go and buy that can you buy it in the supermarket? Is it called ALP or something?
No. Alpha lipoic acid.
The whole thing. Okay. I was trying to tell my mom about
it. ALA by itself is actually a omega-3 fatty acid. That's not what this is. Okay. This is alpha lipoic acid naturally found in green vegetables. And that's why green vegetables detoxify, by the way.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. So here's what I found out serendipitously as I was looking it up. A patient had a question about it, so I was researching it. And lo and behold, I got into other uses of alpha lipoic acid. And you know what it is? It's to stabilize lungs during respiratory illnesses. Stabilize lungs. People didn't die of lung disease of lung reaction from the COVID virus. People's lungs had a cytokine storm. It overreacted. This was not a suppressed immune response in the lungs. It was a hyperimmune response, which is why people on a lot of autoimmune meds did better, because the autoimmune med kept the lungs peaceful. So my patients, now again, let me be clear. I run a weight loss clinic where there's a lot of diabetics and hypertensive patients.
Who were number one on the list?
I had everything. Not all of my patients went without a lung issue from COVID. See, we had COVID here before we knew what COVID was. What the community said was, the virus is going around and most people do well. That was the message. I have physicians in my program. We compared notes because this thing was going around. It was a bad sore throat, bad headache at times, and the tiredness lingered for weeks and months. We knew that. And some lost taste. I had it and I lost my taste. I never lose my taste and I love to eat. So I remember saying, I said, this had better pass, right?
Right.
I did. But I was tired off and on for a good 2 months. Yeah. That was COVID. We didn't test for it, but it was. My patients did great. Why? I check everyone's vitamin D because they were at higher risk anyways because of their diseases that they come to me with. So I check it. They were already corrected. And they were all on alpha lipoic acid. Go figure. And our program does have meat. And meat is a natural source of zinc. My patients were good with zinc. They were good. And I often tell them how to get their vitamin C because there's not much fruit on the diet and they're eating more vegetables. We had it all covered. But again, what this doctor did was she used ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, and it worked. Remember, new disease, by definition, you must use established medicines off label.
What has worked before?
Well, it didn't exist. So how could you possibly have something with proof? But what you do is you look at what this virus acts like, and then you see what medication you have that has compared other that act like it. And behold, they did well. And then they started talking about how this doesn't work and how it's even, off-label is illegal. Off-label for something new has never been illegal. That's what medicine does. You take an action of a medication and you apply it to your patient. That's medicine. That's physicians, being creative because the patient has a new symptom where, again, there isn't an established protocol. Right. So you must create. And anytime, I remember when standards happened, I've been around a while. And when I was in critical care, I've been a critical care nurse, a cardiac nurse, a head nurse, an administrator. And what we did in my cardiac care department, whenever something new came out, new research, I would print out the research study and we would sit, my nurses would talk with the residents, the docs, about the merit of it. And it's very common to say, well, we think that this recommendation is overreaching a little bit because the population studied and what they're saying, everyone, see, here's the key. Everyone should never do anything. Not everyone. You have to personalize it to the person. If I have an allergy to a very good substance, I should not take the substance. It's just that easy. You have to personalize. And if I'm not sick, I shouldn't be forced to take something new, a drug that's new, when I'm not sick. It's called risk benefit. Yeah. The solution should never be worse than the problem. Solution problem. We're talking about mitigation. The original study, it's not a study, it was a quantitative research where you put data into a program, the data is hypothetical to a certain degree.
Can I
Yes.
interrupt for 1 second? In this study that you're talking about, and the ones that you have been talking about, are the people that they're studying, are they sick people?
No, and this, what I'm talking about is the projected research that said if you don't lock people up, this is before the mitigation started. It was the scientists who wanted you to do the mitigation.
Okay.
And they told England at first, she's out of England, and England said, we're not doing it. I'm not shutting down this economy. We don't know. And 80% of people did not have symptoms. That's a really good virus to get herd immunity really fast. When 80% can get the virus and make antibodies and not get sick, that's phenomenal.
Right.
This was a fast herd immunity virus, had it been left alone. So England said, we're not going to shut down. And then Italy had this massive death, and they said it was because hospital beds were overcrowded. Well, it turns out a lot of the beds weren't overcrowded from COVID. It was another pneumonia. And secondly, Italy has a terrible healthcare system with very few ventilators and hospital beds. So it was like a mess. But what they did was they said, you will have like 500,000 deaths in the United States if you don't do the lockdown, and you'll have 250 in England. And I haven't read that report in a while, but I think I'm close. And so then Trump locked down for 2 weeks, and England did their thing. But remember, we were 2 weeks, and that was to study the problem because he didn't want 500,000 people dying for heaven's sake.
So we were listening to Italy.
We were listening to mitigators. Their purpose in life is to socially mitigate. Let me be
very
really
good
clear.
at it, obviously.
That's their job. That's their specialty. They're scientists, but their specialty is social mitigation. That's what this whole thing was. And you know what that study said? 1, if you lock down, you will slow the spread, but the spread will happen. And there's graphs on how it shows a second wave, a third wave. So they told you right from the beginning, it'll never prevent spread totally. Number 2, it said it will cause economic destruction.
Ta-da!
They knew it. They knew it. In other words, you cannot say that people did things with good intentions, not knowing all this negative consequence, because they warned us of the negative consequence. See, it was never supposed to go on this long. How else do you know that this was a movement with an intent? The movement would never have been as successful if it wasn't for our social media, the ability to coordinate messages. The news media has coordinated messages for a long time. And I became aware that like 10 years ago, and I used to drive my husband crazy when you'd listen to news on one channel and they'd come up with this new phrase, and the phrase is used everywhere. And I'd go, Steve, they're getting their information and what they're allowed to say from the same place. I said, look at this. It's the same stupid sentence. That's been going on a long time. But with this, it would to coordinate this critical. How do we know this was? Are you ready?
I'm sorry. Can I back you up? Can I back you up 10 seconds? Because you just froze on me. I don't want to miss that last sentence. Right after you told your husband, you said it's the same thing.
Line.
Yeah.
Okay. How did we know that this was coordinated and was meant to go on a long time? Nobody was expecting to stay locked down more than this experimental 2 weeks. Now, how did we know this was a long-term plan? Here it comes. What they said was within the first week, this is the new normal.
New normal.
Who says that? Who says new normal? Number 1, we don't even know what the heck's going on right now. You not only know what's going on, you're calling it the new normal. You're telling us you expect us to live like this for a long time. That's what you're telling us.
You got a name for it already.
So I heard that line. My son's a chiropractor in the Philippines, and I looked at Steve and I said, Steve, this is going worldwide. This is really bad. My son calls us that day and says the Philippines are locking down. They only had a few cases. And we said, come home, because Trump already said he will fly any American home who's stuck in a country where they stopped flying. It took my son 24 hours to get enough connecting flights without flights shutting down, because countries were shutting down. And finally got home, and he was with us for a year.
Thank God he got home.
Yeah, thank God he got home is right. So number one, getting over the mitigation is literal. The litigation was planned. It was supposed to become the new normal, only the world said, we're not having any of this. We are not okay. Number two, there were protests from the beginning. There were alarms that went off from the beginning on harms to human beings that we didn't need to go into this to know we're harming human beings, but there were alarms. Nobody cared. As a matter of fact, the news media said it's necessary. And they also said every physician who reported the harm was called disinformation, and they were pulled from social sites. Now, I found the sites they were reporting from. So I heard the whole presentation, and it was filled with data. And the other thing, science. You can't have a science study on what you're saying is going on because it's a new thing. What can you have? Data. You can have data analyzed. You can also have off-label use of medications because it's a new problem, and you can track it. Dr. Stephen McCullough
was one of the ones from Moderna.
He was key
in creating this, right?
He created a protocol early on, which I accessed. I knew that protocol. I also shared it with different physicians. And you know what I heard? See, I don't do family practice. I do a specialty service where I actually tell the person, I am not your primary care physician. Why? Because a lot of the traditional, what was guidelines that became standards, they're so behind, and they're so miss the point of how you can create health naturally. I didn't want anything to do with that. I wanted to attract patients who want to create health naturally. And as they get healthy, I can reduce their meds. I'm a nurse practitioner. And I tell them, I will not be reducing meds because you want to be off. I'll be reducing meds when you don't need them anymore. How do we know you don't need them anymore? Your lab work improves, your blood pressure improves, your blood sugar improves. So I have actual evidence of health, and then I withdraw meds and we see how you're doing without it. And I have diabetics who aren't diabetics anymore. And the reason is their A1C is normal with no meds. See, if you're normal with no meds, you don't have the disease. You shut it off. And you can shut off a lot of chronic diseases. And I love the word chronic. That was another ploy. A lot of these chronic diseases aren't chronic. They're only chronic because you don't change anything.
Right. My
specialty is changing things so you stop the chronic. And they do. And I use natural things to do it. And a lot of the natural things is food, which is amazing, right? Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and medicine your food. He was right. But he was not the father of modern medicine. He was the father of medicine. Modern did something different. It's pharmaceutical driven, too much, way too much. Okay, so is the mitigation, was it meant to be long-term? Yes, it was meant more than long-term. It was meant to change our society to the new normal. New normal. And what do we know the new normal looks like? Let's just look at what we've done. The new normal is life online.
One more time,
is
please.
People
it froze on me. Go back one more
you know
time.
what the young kids did?
Can you go
we
back?
We were supposed to save the elderly.
Can you go back to
Where do you want
after new normal?
Yeah. What does the new normal look like?
Yeah.
We know life is online as much as possible. Online. There's no human contact as much as possible. Human beings need people. We need people. Like I am enjoying talking to you today because I can see you. Yeah. I enjoy talking to you when I can hear you. But oh my gosh, is it better seeing you?
Yeah.
Human beings like to see faces. They like expressions. Okay. The mask, what did it do? It eliminated expressions.
How many kids did it hurt?
Well, we don't know the total. We don't know the total damage, but we know that suicide is up. We know that emotional problems in kids is up. We know everyone who had an emotional problem liked hiding behind a mask, and they're still hiding.
I still see them, yeah. And when you go from what 4% to 32% of people being depressed, you tell me that
from
had nothing to do with it. Come
to
on.
32.8. 8.9 to 32.8 reported depression. It's much worse. And it's hope. Remember, depression is hopelessness. We managed to take away people's hope that life will improve, which we should never give up, because it wasn't the virus. It was the mitigation, the very mitigation that the people studying it, proposing it knew would cause great harm. Who would ever pick a solution where 80% of people aren't even don't even have symptoms that are significant, that destroys your social network and your interpersonal life. And what, by the way, which jobs were lost? It was the individual owned small business.
Oh, but
We know that's
did
part of
Amazon
the
get affected, or did they make money?
It grew. Again, what does the new normal look like? We are seeing it. Small individual freedoms are gone. And we made fun of the freedom as if that's a lucrative thing. Freedom over your body is how you create health. That is how you create health. Individuals who know themselves, who make intelligent decisions for themselves, and you never force anything experimental on a healthy person who doesn't want it. You don't even force it on an unhealthy person who doesn't want it. I'll go even further. I was a critical care nurse. There's a thing called informed consent. People, get diagnosed with illnesses where they decide that the treatment, which sometimes doesn't even cure it, is worse than the problem. They have a right to say, I want quality of life until my life is over. They have a right.
Yeah, that is so. I'm glad you said that, because I was in the hospital one time and they tried to make me take insulin. I don't want to go down that road, so I said no.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and that if you had me
to talking about, right?
Yes, I am. But that one, I will tell you, if I'd have been your nurse, I would have explained to you that the reason you are so sick and your pancreas isn't working right now is because of all the stress your body's under. It's not a permanent thing.
So if I take the insulin, I can get off it?
Yes, that was a temp. See, we put people, non-diabetics, on insulin drips in ICU all the time because their pancreas shut down because of the stress response. Normal thing. And I would have explained to you that when you're done with whatever the infection, whatever the illnesses you have, the odds of your pancreas bouncing back are excellent, and they're excellent. However, if it didn't, you could at any time say stop. But I would have also explained to you that insulin is like taking Synthroid when you have a thyroid non-functioning. You want to replace a natural thing your body makes when it can't make it. Does that make sense?
It does, 100%.
It's different from being hooked on something else. But anyways, but see, and what you just said, do you understand how informed consent is the key?
That's what I was just talking to you about. Same thing, right?
Instead, what we said is, if you don't listen to what we say, you hate and you don't care about your fellow man. And you know what kids did? Kids forbid their parents from seeing the new grandchild if the parent wasn't vaccinated. What is with that? What is with that? We actually became, tyranny was institutionalized now person to person, because we made people feel self-righteous. See, you're so smart. You're doing what we told you, and we called it science. Well, the only science we were doing with mitigation was a science experiment.
Yes.
And in the United States, you're not allowed to do experiments without informed consent.
Yes, very good point. And I want to end on that. Liz Winet, I could talk to you for hours. Tell people how to get a hold of you. We went over my producers, but your show is so great, and I personally would like to get in touch with you and talk more about your clinic on a different level. But please tell us how to do that.
Okay, you contact us, and what can you participate with unless you're my patient? It would be our classes, and we do Zoom classes, and they're weekly. They're 6 months of topics on how you create health naturally, and you would call 574-277-5555. We're located in Mishawaka, Indiana.
That's one of my favorites, and you guys just know why. Liz
Take care.
Great.
Love meeting you.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you can now listen live on the MyTuner Radio and online Radio Box apps for iOS, Android, and the Amazon App Store. Or check us out online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com or search Podcast Business News Network on onlineradiobox.com/US so you don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.